I love to talk about my book because it's really very much a personal story. So just to kind of take it back a bit and explain how it all happened. And again, there's a lot of serendipity in this as well. But I graduated. I'm an Italian. I'm born in Italy, and I went to study in the United States. And it's interesting because I studied journalism. And I didn't really put a lot of thought into my degree at the time. I think my generation, I'm a Gen X, we weren't as prepared as the millennials. We didn't have all these big plans on what to study and what to do to get to the next thing. So I just knew I liked writing. So I figured, why not? And I studied journalism, and I had in mind that one day I would be a war correspondent and would probably win a Pulitzer Prize or something. But that was pretty much the last time I had thought about writing a book until recently. But what happened is after I graduated, I decided to move back to Italy against my father's advice. And in fact, it kind of, drew a long life, a ridge between him and I, because he thought that I should remain in the United States. And I came back to Italy, which is where I really experienced firsthand, the horrifying working experiences that entry-level talent were having. So I came obviously with a degree from the United States. I was young, I was, ambitious, I was full of energy. I wanted to change the world. I didn't quite know how, but I know I wanted to take the world up for a storm. And I started working initially in an advertising agency, and I just realized that ambition was not rewarded, was not even encouraged. I was, asked to make coffee and print photocopies and type emails. My boss was really, really stern. We were told that it was not okay to be authentic. It was not okay to be yourself. It was not okay to talk about your personal life at work. Everything had to be business. I was given no explanation of the things I had to do. I was just expected to hit the ground running. And even asking for direction meant that I wasn't qualified. I wasn't smart enough to figure it out. I remember we used to have a coffee machine that was in a small, tiny copy room. So while I was copying away, sometimes you would have a colleague from other departments come in and put the coin in and get the coffee. And during those fleeting moments, you would try to have a conversation, but one of us always had to be on high alert, because if we heard the boss, we heard her heels from down the hall, we would need to immediately stop talking, because if she did show up, we'd be reminded in not a very nice way that socializing was not authorized and was not allowed. We were not there to socialize. We were there to work, and we could get fired if we didn't do our work, and instead we chitter chattered. And so, I wouldn't have it. So I remember one day I called my grandfather, who was a traditionalist, a lawyer, very strong-willed man. And I started complaining about how menial I felt and how sad I felt that I couldn't put my gifts to the test. I remember I had asked to be part of an internal meeting. And I was called in by HR because I was overstepping my boundaries. And what was I doing? I was a rookie, I shouldn't have anything to say, and so on. And when I told this to my grandfather, instead of finding empathy, he got really mad at me. He told me, you just started. What's wrong with you? You should be grateful you have a job. You should be grateful they're even paying you. You have to lower your head and pay your dues. And I didn't really buy it. So I quit, and I found another job, and I experienced a few other horrifying experiences until I decided to move back to the United States, put myself in the game again, start school again. And that's actually when I got contacted by my former employer, which was an employer branding company. And it's interesting because what an employer branding company did at the time was really help organizations understand how to position themselves as ideal employers. And I remember, obviously, traumatized by my Italian experience, I fell in love with a concept that not only, companies were, paying their people a decent amount of money and giving them important things to do, but they were actually investing millions of dollars to find ways to position themselves as the best place where somebody young and full of energy could have a career. So you can imagine, I fell in love with employment. It was love at first sight. And I decided to dedicate the next 18 years to that. And what I think was really lucky for me is that as I joined this organization, this was 2006. I was in the US at the time. And 2006 was a very special year because it was the year when all millennials, the Gen Ys, they were exiting out, they were undergraduates, and all the Gen X, my generation, were MBAs. So the company ran a study about students' preferences, ideal employers, career expectations, and so on and so forth. And that year I was at interim head of research globally, and I was looking at the data. And I remember I was shocked because the data between the millennials, the undergrads, and the Gen X were completely different. My generation, we wanted prestige and money and leadership opportunity. And this new generation, they wanted work-life balance and ethical standards and friendly environment. We wanted to work for management consulting companies and accounting firms and banks, and they wanted to work for the government and teach for America and nonprofits. And I remember that I was blown away. And maybe one thing I didn't mention is that after my career in advertising in Italy, I worked for CNBC as an anchor woman for a couple of years. So I had that, television experience working in this kind of, high pressured environment. And I remember how wonderful it was when I would get somebody to present me with some data that was very relevant. And when I saw this, I thought, gosh, this can change the world. Like if companies start listening to this and realize that this new generations want something completely different, the workplace as we know it could completely change. And so I took it on myself to become kind of an ambassador for this generation. And I started working over the years with about 2,000 companies, from your CIAs to your, pretty much any company that you can think of, your Goldman Sachs's and, all your different large organizations, and really explaining to them that if they wanted to win this war for talent, they needed to change. And I think in doing that, I feel today, looking back, that I may have played a very small part in kind of changing the world. If we look at what the workplace is today, it's very different than it was when I initially joined the workforce. Now people are empowered. You can take for granted almost, at least in most of the developed and emerging world, that you're going to have a friendly environment. You're going to have bosses who are going to try to support you. You're going to have training and development. You're going to be valued for who you are. I mean, millennials, they normalize taboo subjects, like mental health and sexuality and many other things. I mean, it was just wonderful, right? So I love that. But one thing that I noticed as I was working with organizations with these millennials is that I realized that in their attempt to kind of transform to meet the needs of this new generation, they kind of failed to explain to the existing generations why this change was happening. So in some way, these millennials were kind of shoved down people's throats. And all of a sudden you had, baby boomers and Gen Xers and traditionalists in the workplace saying, why are these entitled kids coming in? And why do they get so much attention? And why do I need to all of a sudden change my leadership style and transform myself into the perfect coach and the perfect mentor and, the perfect leader? And nobody taught me how to be that. Actually, being nice wasn't really part of the job description until recently, right? And so this started creating a lot of tensions between these new generations and the existing generations that I believe has really halted progress. So we see it, every time we hear an okay boomer statement or a strawberry statement, right? There is so much there's so much attention, under the surface. And so basically I decided, after years of working with organizations and realizing that one of the top reasons why people leave is intergenerational conflicts, that I would, focus on bringing people together, on making sure that, organizations and leaders understand the importance of bridging the generational divide, understand the strengths that, each generation can bring to the table. COVID obviously, showed us that we need both the social mindedness, the ambition and the creativity of the young, but also the knowledge, the resilience and the and the experience of the older generations. And so how can we, make sure that every generation understands where each other comes from? Because really, very often these tensions come from the fact that nobody has any idea, or the young generations, for example, they don't know what I went through. They don't know that being authentic was wrong and was not encouraged. And so I figured that if I could give a kind of 360-degree perspective when I took people back in time to understand what the reality was like when each generation in the workplace joined the workplace, it would be easier for them to understand that the mindsets they criticize are really embedded in the forces that shape them. And so I decided to write this book, Reframing Generational Stereotypes. And, it was a fantastic journey because I had already decided this was something that I wanted to pursue in terms of topic. And I think, talking about gratitude and serendipity, the day that I sat down and I thought, this is really what makes me happy. I really want to do this. The next day, I got a call from someone that I respect very much, my mentor, Bob Aubrey. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. And I had never met with him outside of work context, but we sat down and I started talking about this. And he started to tell me that he had never seen me this excited or passionate about anything. And I said, yeah, this is really what I want to do. And he made a connection with McGraw-Hill, and they reached out to me proactively and said, this is a wonderful topic. Everybody's covering generations from a one-sided angle. Nobody's looking at it holistically. So if you want to write a book, we would love to publish it. So they offered me a publishing contract before I even had a plan for a book. And of course, I thought, this must be a sign. I mean, when things happen, this quickly, and it means that this is really the way you need to go. And so I wrote the book throughout lockdown with 3 kids under 5, still a full-time job, and a grumpy husband because he had to work from home and wasn't used to it. But so it was quite the journey, but it was all worth it. And I'm very proud of the outcome. And I really hope that I can get as many people to read it, because understanding is key to collaboration.